This episode of One Piece feels like such a massive turning point in the series, not just for Zoro and his place in the world, but the perspective of where we are in general, the size of the ocean. It feels like the East Blue is just like a grain of sand in an endless beach that is yet to be explored, and the rest of the beach is a lot more dangerous. That analogy is terrible, but do you know what I'm saying? The scope of the series just got insane, just with this character Mihawk and what he just did to Zoro, and it's really changed my perspective on just how dangerous the rest of the ocean is and the Grand Line is, and how insignificant the East Blue seems to be in the context of the entire world, essentially, of One Piece. Zoro, up to this point, has been one of the stronger characters in the series, up there with Luffy. Whenever his name is brought up, people know him. He's infamous for his strength and the three-sword style and all that sort of stuff. But after this episode, that feels completely irrelevant in the wider context of the world of One Piece and this ocean and the Grand Line and everything else. It doesn't even feel like Zoro even registers in the world as a threat, because now Mihawk has come along from the Grand Line and made a fool of him, essentially. And it's not just the fact that Mihawk beat him, it's the way he beat him. He didn't even use his main sword, at least not till the end. He brought out a little knife, essentially, just to prove the gap between him and Zoro. And it wasn't even a flex, basically. He said he's not some monster that goes all out when hunting a rabbit. That's how he looks at Zoro. He's literally just like prey to him. He's not even worth thinking about. Imagine how that makes Zoro feel. He's been training his whole life for this, to face this guy, to become the world's strongest swordsman, and he finally comes face to face with him and he can't touch him. He uses onigiri, it gets blocked like nothing. He goes to use like a technique we've never seen before and it does nothing. Mihawk just goes up and stabs him with this little knife, and I can't imagine the perspective shift that Zoro must have. He must be like, wow, in the context of this world, I'm nothing in terms of being the world's strongest swordsman. I'm not even close. And he even says it. He's like, the gap between us can't be this large, and it is. And I think this is a perfect reference to say what the rest of the world is like. What we've seen in the East Blue so far, even this stuff with Don Krieg, is such a small, minuscule part of the world of One Piece, and it makes me super excited to see what else is actually out there, and a bit terrified as well. Mihawk even says himself that the East Blue is the weakest of all the seas, which is crazy, which means everything we've seen so far basically is nothing compared to what else is out there. Like I said, this episode's completely changed the perspective on the series so far, and what happened in this episode isn't just massively pivotal for Zoro as a character, I imagine, going forward, but I think it's a great analogy to sort of give the scope of the series and what is actually out there that needs to be conquered if Luffy has any dream of becoming king of the pirates. However, it wasn't just an entire loss for Zoro. This could be a really good thing for him moving forward. He even got the respect of Mihawk at one point, because the whole fight Mihawk was calling him weak one, essentially. But when Mihawk eventually stabbed him, Zoro didn't take a step back, because he said it would be like going back on all the promises he made in the past. And I think seeing the strength, the willpower of Zoro made Mihawk think like, this dude actually has potential, and then he eventually called him Strong One, and he even decided to use his real sword in the battle as a sign, I think, of respect for Zoro. And let's be honest, Mihawk at any point could have killed Zoro for sure. It wouldn't have been a problem for him, but I think he's kept him alive because he sees the potential, a potential adversary, somebody that could actually nip at the heels of the world's strongest swordsman. And I think that's very interesting. And seeing the gap between Zoro and Mihawk has 100% given Zoro some new motivation, because he said while he was crying after the fight that he's never going to lose a battle again. And he even says to Luffy, what you want is the world's strongest swordsman in your crew, right? And that's exactly what he's going to aim to be. So now he has perspective. It's going to give him even more motivation to, become stronger. And he actually has another goal to achieve. Before he was chasing Kuina, and now he's got Hawkeye to chase, which, I mean, the gap's even wider by a million miles in that perspective. But I think it's gonna make Zoro even stronger. But like I said, the main takeaway from this episode for me isn't just from Zoro's character, but the scope of the world and the actual potential danger that's out there, and what it's going to take for Luffy's crew to actually, get to the Grand Line and get the One Piece and achieve their goals, because the world is a whole lot more dangerous than we even realized. This episode did such an incredible job of building up the world of One Piece and Zoro as a character. One Piece is always amazing at sort of character building and world building, but this episode was next level for me. It's made me so excited to see what else is out there and what other fucking demons exist in this world. But besides all that, at the very end of this episode, Luffy has sent the rest of his crew to go and find Nami. Luckily, Zoro's still alive. Mihawk kept him alive, like I said. but Luffy has said he won't accept anybody else as a navigator but Nami. So now everybody's going after her. I think he realizes she hasn't really betrayed them. You know, there's something else going on there, and it goes to show the loyalty of Luffy that he won't accept anybody else. And we've still got this Don Krieg versus Luffy fight to happen, which I'm very excited about. But yeah, wow, this episode as a whole was incredible. One of my favorite episodes so far for sure. And yeah, Mihawk is a fucking monster, bro.